Sarah Martinez had always believed that the mountains held secrets. As she strapped on her gear that crisp October morning at Yellowstone National Park, she never imagined she would become part of one of the most extraordinary survival stories ever recorded. The 28-year-old park ranger had been working in the wilderness for 6 years, but nothing in her training had prepared her for what lay ahead. The emergency call came in at 7:42 a.m. A small aircraft carrying 3 passengers had gone missing somewhere over the remote Absaroka Range. The pilot's last radio transmission indicated engine trouble before the signal went dead. Sarah was part of the elite search and rescue team that specialized in high-altitude operations. Her expertise in mountain rescue and her fearless approach to dangerous situations made her the natural choice to lead the aerial search mission. The helicopter lifted off from the ranger station as the sun painted the peaks in brilliant gold. Sarah sat beside the pilot, Mark Thompson, scanning the rugged terrain below with binoculars. The landscape stretched endlessly, a maze of jagged ridges, deep valleys, and dense forests that could easily swallow a small plane without a trace. The morning air was crisp and clear, offering perfect visibility for their search operation. Mark was an experienced pilot who had flown rescue missions for over 15 years. He knew these mountains like the back of his hand, understanding how the wind patterns shifted around the peaks and how quickly weather could change. Sarah trusted him completely. Their partnership had saved dozens of lives over the years, and their communication was seamless as they coordinated the search pattern. 2 hours into the mission, they spotted something unusual. A glint of metal caught Sarah's attention in a narrow canyon about 8,000 feet below their current altitude. She adjusted her binoculars and felt her heart race. There, wedged between 2 massive boulders, was the twisted wreckage of a small Cessna aircraft. Smoke was still rising from the crash site, indicating the impact had been recent. The location was treacherous. The canyon walls were nearly vertical, and the crash site was surrounded by unstable rock formations. Landing the helicopter anywhere near the wreckage would be impossible. The only way to reach the survivors, if there were any, would be through a dangerous rappelling operation from the helicopter itself. Sarah immediately radioed their base camp, providing coordinates and requesting additional rescue teams. But time was critical. If anyone had survived the crash, every minute counted. The remote location meant it would take at least 4 hours for ground rescue teams to reach the area, even with the best equipment and fastest routes. Mark maneuvered the helicopter as close as possible to the crash site, fighting against unpredictable wind currents that bounced off the canyon walls. Sarah prepared her rappelling gear, checking and double-checking every piece of equipment. The rescue harness, ropes, medical supplies, and communication devices all had to be perfect. One mistake at this altitude could be fatal. As they hovered 200 feet above the wreckage, Sarah could see movement near the aircraft. At least one person had survived the crash and was waving frantically at the helicopter. The urgency of the situation intensified. She needed to get down there immediately to assess injuries and provide medical assistance. The wind suddenly shifted, and Mark struggled to maintain the helicopter's position. The aircraft was being pushed toward the canyon wall by a powerful downdraft. Sarah was already clipped into her rappelling line, ready to descend, when everything went wrong in an instant. A massive gust of wind, unlike anything they had encountered before, slammed into the helicopter's side. The aircraft lurched violently to the right, and Mark fought desperately to regain control. The helicopter's rotor wash had been disturbed by the canyon's unique wind patterns, creating a dangerous vortex that trapped them in a downward spiral. Sarah felt the helicopter tilting at an impossible angle. She looked at Mark and saw the fear in his eyes as he pulled on the controls with all his strength. The engine screamed as he attempted to gain altitude, but the wind vortex was too powerful. They were being pulled down toward the rocky canyon floor at an alarming speed. In that terrifying moment, Sarah made a decision that would either save her life or end it. The helicopter was going to crash, and she was still attached to her rappelling line. Instead of staying with the aircraft and facing certain death, she chose to trust her equipment and her training. She activated the quick-release mechanism on her harness just as the helicopter began its final descent. The separation happened in a split second. Sarah found herself free-falling through the mountain air, her body tumbling uncontrollably as the helicopter crashed into the canyon wall below. The sound of the impact echoed through the mountains like thunder, followed by an explosion that sent flames and debris scattered across the rocky terrain. She was alone, falling through space at terminal velocity, with no parachute and no way to control her descent. The ground rushed toward her at 120 miles per hour. Her training kicked in automatically, and she tried to position her body to minimize the impact, but, at this altitude and speed, survival seemed impossible. The canyon walls blurred past her as she fell. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Sarah's mind raced through memories of her childhood, her family, and all the rescue missions she had completed. She thought about the crash survivors below who were now witnessing her desperate fall from the sky. In those final moments before impact, Sarah experienced a strange sense of calm. She had always known that her job carried enormous risks, and she had accepted that possibility long ago. But, even as she prepared for the inevitable, a small part of her refused to give up hope. The mathematical reality was stark. An 8,000-foot fall without a parachute should result in certain death. The human body simply cannot survive the forces involved in such an impact. Yet occasionally, under extraordinary circumstances, the impossible becomes possible. Sarah's body struck the first obstacle about 500 feet from the ground. It was a massive pine tree, its thick branches breaking her fall momentarily before she crashed through them. The impact spun her sideways, changing her trajectory slightly but barely slowing her descent. She hit two more trees in rapid succession, each collision breaking bones and tearing flesh but also absorbing some of the devastating kinetic energy. The branches acted like a series of natural airbags, each one reducing her speed incrementally. The final impact came as Sarah struck a steep slope covered in deep powder snow. The snow had accumulated in the shadowed area of the canyon, remaining soft and loose despite the October weather. Her body hit the slope at an angle, rather than straight down, which distributed the impact force over a longer distance and time period. She rolled and tumbled down the snowy slope for nearly 200 feet, her body finally coming to rest against a large boulder. Steam rose from her broken form as the snow around her turned red with blood. The silence that followed was complete except for the distant crackling of the helicopter wreckage burning somewhere above. Sarah Martinez had just survived what should have been an impossible fall. But survival was only the beginning of her ordeal. She was critically injured, alone in one of the most remote locations in North America, with no way to communicate her location to rescuers. The nearest help was miles away across treacherous mountain terrain. As consciousness slowly returned, Sarah became aware of intense pain throughout her body. She could taste blood in her mouth and felt the warm wetness spreading beneath her. Every breath sent sharp agony through her chest, indicating broken ribs and possibly punctured lungs. Her left arm was twisted at an unnatural angle, clearly fractured in multiple places. But she was alive. Against all odds and scientific probability, she had survived an 8,000-foot fall without a parachute. The combination of the trees, the snow, and pure chance had conspired to save her life. Now she faced a different kind of challenge, staying alive long enough to be rescued. The temperature was dropping rapidly as afternoon clouds moved in, threatening snow. Sarah knew she had to find shelter and somehow signal for help, but moving seemed impossible with her injuries. Every slight movement sent waves of agony through her broken body. She could hear voices in the distance, coming from the direction of the original plane crash. The survivors she had been trying to rescue were apparently mobile and searching for her. But they were at least half a mile away, across difficult terrain that would be challenging even for uninjured people to navigate. Sarah tried to call out, but her voice was weak and barely audible. The sound echoed off the canyon walls but probably could not be heard over the wind and the distance. She needed to conserve her energy and find a way to make herself visible to search teams that would eventually arrive. Using her uninjured right arm, she began gathering small stones and arranging them in a pattern that might be visible from above. The effort exhausted her, but she knew that search helicopters would be looking for any sign of survivors. Creating a signal marker could mean the difference between rescue and death. As the first snowflakes began to fall, Sarah pulled her torn jacket tighter around her body and prepared for what would be the longest night of her life. She had survived the impossible fall, but her ordeal was far from over. The night descended on Sarah like a cold, merciless predator. Temperature plummeted to near freezing as the October mountain weather turned hostile. Snow continued falling steadily, accumulating around her broken body and threatening to bury her completely. Every breath created visible vapor clouds that dissipated quickly in the frigid air. Sarah's medical training helped her assess her condition systematically despite the overwhelming pain. She had multiple broken ribs, a fractured left arm, probable internal bleeding, and countless cuts and bruises. Her right leg felt numb, which concerned her more than the pain would have. Loss of sensation could indicate spinal damage or severe nerve injury. The hypothermia was her most immediate threat. Her torn clothing provided little insulation against the mountain cold, and blood loss was making temperature regulation even more difficult. She knew that without proper shelter and warmth, she would not survive until morning regardless of her other injuries. Using her good arm, Sarah began digging into the snow that had cushioned her fall. She created a small depression against the boulder, following survival techniques she had taught countless park visitors. The snow would actually provide insulation if used correctly, trapping body heat while protecting her from the wind. The physical effort was excruciating. Each movement sent lightning bolts of agony through her damaged ribs, and she had to rest frequently to avoid losing consciousness. But the alternative was certain death, so she forced herself to continue working despite the pain. Hours passed as she slowly improved her shelter. The snow cave was small and cramped, but it would protect her from the worst of the weather. She gathered pine needles and small branches to create a barrier between her body and the frozen ground, understanding that direct contact with the snow would accelerate heat loss. Around midnight, Sarah heard the distant sound of aircraft engines. Search and rescue teams were already looking for the missing helicopter, probably using infrared equipment to detect heat signatures. She tried to move outside her shelter to signal them, but the aircraft passed without detecting her location. The disappointment was crushing, but Sarah refused to give up hope. She knew that rescue operations would continue at first light, and her job was to stay alive until then. She retreated back into her snow cave and focused on maintaining body heat through controlled exercises with her uninjured limbs. Sleep was impossible due to the pain and cold, but Sarah entered a state of focused meditation that helped her manage both. She thought about her family back in Colorado, her parents who had always supported her dangerous career choice, and her younger sister who looked up to her as a role model. She remembered her training instructor's words from Ranger School: "The difference between survivors and victims is not luck or skill alone. It is the absolute refusal to quit, even when quitting seems logical." Those words had carried her through countless difficult situations, and they would carry her through this one. Dawn brought mixed blessings. The snowfall stopped, and weak sunlight filtered into the canyon, raising the temperature slightly. But Sarah's condition had deteriorated overnight. She was weaker from blood loss, dehydrated, and experiencing symptoms of concussion including nausea and dizziness. The voices she had heard the previous day returned, much closer now. The airplane crash survivors were actively searching for her, having apparently survived their own ordeal in better condition than expected. Sarah tried calling out, but her voice was barely a whisper after the cold night. Instead, she focused on making herself visible. Using her reflective compass mirror, she caught the morning sunlight and began flashing signals toward the voices. The mirror created bright flashes that could be seen for miles in the clear mountain air. Within 20 minutes, she heard excited shouting. "Over here! I see something!" The voice belonged to a man, and he sounded strong and alert. Sarah continued flashing the mirror until she saw two figures climbing carefully down the rocky slope toward her position. The first person to reach her was Dr. James Morrison, a 45-year-old physician who had been returning from a medical conference when their plane crashed. His companion was Lisa Chen, a nurse practitioner who had also been on the flight. Both had sustained only minor injuries in their crash and had spent the night searching for help. Dr. Morrison's face showed shock when he saw Sarah's condition. "My God, how did you survive that fall?" he asked while immediately beginning a medical assessment. His professional training took over despite the extraordinary circumstances. Lisa began checking Sarah's vital signs while Dr. Morrison examined her injuries. "We need to get her stabilized before any rescue attempt," he told Lisa. "She's lost significant blood, and moving her incorrectly could cause additional damage." They had limited medical supplies from the aircraft's first aid kit, but both medical professionals worked efficiently to address Sarah's most critical needs. They cleaned and bandaged her wounds, created a makeshift splint for her broken arm, and used their own clothing to provide additional insulation. "The rescue teams are already searching for us," Dr. Morrison explained to Sarah. "Our plane's emergency beacon activated automatically, and they know our approximate location. But this canyon is creating problems for radio communication." Sarah learned that their pilot had died in the crash, but both passengers had been thrown clear during the impact and landed in a snowbank similar to her own experience. They had spent the night in the wreckage, using the aircraft's remaining fuel to maintain a small fire for warmth. As they worked to stabilize her condition, Sarah told them about the helicopter crash and Mark's fate. The weight of losing her partner and friend added emotional pain to her physical suffering. Mark had been like a brother to her, and she struggled with guilt about surviving when he had not. By mid-morning, they could hear helicopter rotors echoing through the canyon. The rescue teams were getting closer, but the narrow canyon and unstable wind conditions made landing extremely difficult. The helicopters would have to use the same rappelling techniques that had led to the original accident. Dr. Morrison made the difficult decision to move Sarah to a more open area where rescue would be possible. Using improvised techniques and equipment salvaged from both crash sites, they created a makeshift stretcher from aircraft seats and cargo straps. The journey across the rocky terrain was agonizing for Sarah despite their careful handling. Every bump and jostle sent waves of pain through her broken body, but she bit down on a piece of leather to avoid crying out. She refused to make their rescue efforts more difficult with complaints about pain. It took them over 3 hours to move half a mile across the canyon floor. They had to navigate around massive boulders, cross a partially frozen stream, and climb over fallen trees. Lisa and Dr. Morrison showed remarkable strength and determination, stopping frequently to rest and check Sarah's condition. The open area they reached was a small meadow surrounded by steep walls but clear overhead. It was the only place in the canyon where a helicopter could potentially land or conduct a safe rescue operation. They arranged Sarah on the stretcher and used brightly colored fabric from the aircraft to create visible signals. The rescue helicopter appeared overhead around 2 p.m., and Sarah felt overwhelming relief at the familiar sound of rotor blades. But her ordeal was not over yet. The pilot had to carefully maneuver in the confined space while rescue personnel prepared for a complex extraction operation. 2 paramedics rappelled down from the helicopter, bringing advanced medical equipment and supplies. They immediately began working on Sarah, starting 4 fluids, administering pain medication, and preparing her for transport. Their professional efficiency was reassuring after the improvised care she had received. "You're going to be okay," one of the paramedics told her as they prepared the rescue harness. "We've got you now, and you're going home." Sarah nodded weakly, finally, allowing herself to believe that she might actually survive this impossible situation. The helicopter extraction was technically complex due to Sarah's injuries and the confined space. The paramedics had to immobilize her completely to prevent additional damage during the lift operation. As they raised her toward the aircraft, Sarah looked down at the canyon that had nearly claimed her life. She saw the scattered wreckage of both aircraft, the snow cave that had saved her life, and the trail across the rocky terrain where her rescuers had carried her to safety. The scene looked like a battlefield, and, in many ways it had been exactly that, a battle between human determination and the indifferent forces of nature. As the helicopter lifted away from the canyon, Sarah closed her eyes and felt the first real warmth she had experienced in over 30 hours. The aircraft's heater was running, and heated blankets surrounded her body. The paramedics continued monitoring her vital signs and adjusting her treatment, but she was finally safe. The flight to the regional medical center took 45 minutes, during which Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness. The pain medication was taking effect, but she remained alert enough to appreciate the professionalism of her rescuers and the miracle of modern medical technology. She thought about the chain of seemingly impossible events that had led to her survival, the trees that broke her fall, the snow that cushioned her landing, the medical professionals who happened to be in the other crashed aircraft, and the favorable weather that allowed the rescue operation to succeed. Each element alone would not have been enough to save her life. But, together, they created a unique set of circumstances that defied statistical probability. Sarah began to understand that her survival was not just about physical toughness or training, it was about the extraordinary convergence of factors that humans often call luck or fate. As they approached the hospital, Sarah could see the medical team waiting on the landing pad. Doctors, nurses, and technicians were prepared for her arrival with equipment and expertise that would have seemed like magic to people just a century earlier. She was about to receive the most advanced trauma care available anywhere in the world. The trauma team was ready before the helicopter touched down at Regional Medical Center. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the chief of emergency medicine, had been briefed on Sarah's condition during the flight and assembled a specialized team of surgeons, orthopedic specialists, and critical care nurses. They understood they were dealing with injuries that should have been fatal. Sarah was transferred from the helicopter to the emergency room in less than 2 minutes. The medical team moved with practiced efficiency, conducting rapid assessments while wheeling her toward the trauma bay. monitors beeped constantly as they measured her vital signs, blood pressure, and oxygen levels. Female, approximately 28 years old, 8,000-foot fall without parachute, Dr. Walsh announced to her team as they began their examination. Multiple fractures, possible internal bleeding, severe hypothermia, and obvious signs of major trauma. Let's get full imaging immediately. The next several hours became a blur of medical procedures, tests, and surgical interventions. X-rays revealed the extent of Sarah's skeletal injuries: 7 broken ribs, a compound fracture of the left arm, a fractured collarbone, and stress fractures in both legs. Miraculously, her spine appeared intact, explaining why she had retained feeling and movement in her extremities. CT scans showed internal bleeding in her abdomen, requiring immediate surgery. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, the trauma surgeon, explained to Sarah's family that they needed to operate quickly to repair damaged blood vessels and organs. The surgery would be risky given her weakened condition, but without it, she would not survive. Sarah's parents, Maria and Robert Martinez, had driven through the night from Colorado after receiving the emergency call. They arrived at the hospital as Sarah was being wheeled into surgery, getting only a brief moment to see their daughter before the operating room doors closed. "She's always been incredibly strong," Maria told Dr. Walsh while they waited. "Even as a child, she never gave up on anything. If anyone can survive this, it's Sarah." Robert stood silently beside his wife, struggling to comprehend how his daughter had survived something that defied all logic and medical understanding. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Dr. Rodriguez and his team worked methodically to repair internal damage while monitoring Sarah's vital signs constantly. They removed her damaged spleen, repaired a torn liver, and stopped bleeding from several ruptured blood vessels. The complexity of her injuries required extraordinary precision and skill. During the operation, news of Sarah's survival began spreading beyond the medical center. The story of a park ranger surviving an 8,000-foot fall without a parachute captured public attention immediately. Local news stations picked up the story, followed quickly by national media outlets. Dr. Rodriguez emerged from surgery exhausted but optimistic. "She's stable," he told Sarah's family. "The internal bleeding is controlled, and her vital organs are functioning. But she's going to face a long and difficult recovery process. The next 48 hours will be critical for determining her long-term prognosis." Sarah spent 3 days in intensive care, drifting in and out of consciousness as her body began the healing process. When she finally woke up clearly, she found her hospital room filled with flowers, cards, and letters from people around the world who had heard her story. Her sister Jennifer had flown in from California and was sitting beside the bed when Sarah opened her eyes. "Welcome back," Jennifer said softly, trying to hide her tears of relief. "You scared us all pretty badly." Sarah tried to speak but found her throat dry and painful. A nurse helped her take small sips of water before she could finally whisper, "Mark? What about Mark?" The question that had been haunting her since the accident. Jennifer's expression told her everything before the words came. "I'm sorry, Sarah. He didn't make it. The helicopter crash killed him instantly." The confirmation of what Sarah already knew hit her like another physical blow, adding grief to her pain and exhaustion. The news media attention intensified as Sarah recovered. Reporters and camera crews gathered outside the hospital, wanting to interview the woman who had survived the impossible. Hospital security had to control access to protect Sarah's privacy while she focused on healing. Dr. Lisa Park, a psychologist specializing in trauma recovery, was brought in to help Sarah process the emotional impact of her experience. The combination of surviving a fatal accident while losing a close friend created complex psychological challenges that required professional support. Survivor guilt is common in situations like this, Dr. Park explained during one of their sessions. "You may feel guilty about surviving when Mark didn't, even though there was nothing you could have done differently. Processing these emotions is just as important as healing your physical injuries." Physical therapy began while Sarah was still bedridden. The extent of her injuries meant that rehabilitation would be a lengthy process requiring determination and patience. Simple tasks like sitting up or moving her fingers became major accomplishments that had to be celebrated and built upon. Her orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Amanda Foster, explained the challenges ahead. "Your bones will heal, but it's going to take time. The compound fracture in your arm was particularly severe, and you may never regain full strength and mobility. We're looking at months of intensive therapy. 3 weeks after the accident, Sarah was able to sit up in bed and have longer conversations with visitors. The story of her survival had inspired thousands of people, and letters poured in from around the world. Children drew pictures of her rescue, survivors of other accidents shared their stories, and fellow park rangers expressed their admiration and support. One letter particularly moved her. It came from Dr. Morrison and Lisa Chen, the medical professionals who had helped save her life after finding her in the canyon. They described their own recovery process and expressed gratitude for bringing them together during their ordeal. "Your courage and determination inspired us to keep fighting when things looked hopeless," Dr. Morrison wrote. "Meeting you changed our perspective on what's possible when people refuse to give up. We wanted you to know that helping you was the most meaningful thing either of us has ever done professionally." Sarah began working with a speech therapist to rebuild her strength for public speaking. Multiple organizations wanted her to share her story, and she felt an obligation to honor Mark's memory and inspire others who might face their own impossible situations. The scientific community was fascinated by the biomechanics of her survival. Researchers from several universities requested permission to study her case, hoping to understand how the human body could survive forces that should have been instantly fatal. Dr. James Patterson, a physicist specializing in impact dynamics, calculated the forces involved in Sarah's fall. Terminal velocity for a human body is approximately 120 miles per hour, he explained in a research paper. The deceleration forces upon impact should have been approximately 200 times the force of gravity. No human should survive that level of trauma. The trees, snow, and slope angle had created what Dr. Patterson called a perfect storm of survival factors. Each element had reduced the impact forces incrementally, distributing the energy over time and distance rather than allowing it to be absorbed instantaneously by Sarah's body. 6 weeks after the accident, Sarah took her first tentative steps with the help of physical therapists and walking aids. The simple act of standing upright was emotionally overwhelming, representing a milestone that many people had doubted she would ever reach. Her recovery became a source of inspiration not just for accident survivors but for anyone facing seemingly impossible challenges. Letters arrived from cancer patients, disabled veterans, and people dealing with personal tragedies who found hope in her refusal to give up. Sarah began planning her return to work, though she knew it would be months before she could resume full duties as a park ranger. Her supervisors had assured her that a position would be available whenever she was ready, adapted to accommodate any permanent limitations from her injuries. The investigation into the helicopter crash concluded that unusual wind conditions in the canyon had created an unpredictable downdraft that Mark could not have anticipated or avoided. The accident was ruled as a result of extraordinary weather conditions rather than pilot error or mechanical failure. Mark's family reached out to Sarah through the hospital, expressing their gratitude that she had survived and their understanding that she had done everything possible to save their son and husband. Their forgiveness and support helped Sarah begin processing her survivor guilt more effectively. As her physical condition stabilized, Sarah started considering how she wanted to use her experience to help others. Speaking opportunities were flooding in, but she wanted to be selective about how she shared her story and ensured that it served a meaningful purpose. She decided to focus on 3 main areas: promoting wilderness safety education, supporting search and rescue operations, and inspiring people facing their own impossible challenges. Her survival story could serve multiple purposes if she approached it thoughtfully and responsibly. The hospital staff had become like family during her extended stay. Nurses, doctors, therapists, and support staff had all played roles in her recovery, and she wanted to maintain those relationships even after discharge. They had shown her that healing required a community of caring professionals working together. Dr. Walsh visited Sarah regularly during her recovery, fascinated both medically and personally by her case. "In 30 years of emergency medicine, I've never seen anything like this," she admitted. "Your survival challenges everything we thought we knew about human limitations." Sarah's case was written up in multiple medical journals, becoming a reference point for trauma surgeons and emergency physicians worldwide. Her survival provided valuable insights into treating extreme impact injuries and managing complex trauma cases. As discharge day approached, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety about returning to the outside world. The hospital had become a safe haven where her survival was celebrated and her recovery was the primary focus. The real world would bring new challenges and expectations. Her physical therapy team developed a comprehensive outpatient program that would continue for at least 6 months. The goal was to maximize her recovery while accepting that some limitations might be permanent. Sarah approached this challenge with the same determination that had saved her life in the canyon. The night before discharge, Sarah stood at her hospital window looking out at the mountains in the distance. She could see the range where her accident had occurred, and, instead of fear, she felt a strange sense of peace. Those mountains had nearly killed her, but they had also revealed strength she never knew she possessed. 2 months after leaving the hospital, Sarah stood at the podium of the National Park Service Training Center, addressing 200 search and rescue professionals from across the country. Her left arm was still in a supportive brace, and she walked with a slight limp, but her voice was strong and clear as she shared her story. The difference between a successful rescue and a tragedy often comes down to seconds and inches, she told the audience. Mark Thompson died because we encountered conditions that no one could have predicted. But the training we received, the equipment we carried, and the decisions we made in those final moments determined whether anyone would survive to tell this story. The audience listened with complete attention as Sarah described the technical aspects of the accident, the survival techniques that had saved her life, and the lessons that could be applied to future rescue operations. Her presentation was both emotionally moving and professionally valuable. After the formal presentation, Sarah was approached by dozens of rescue professionals who wanted to discuss specific techniques and safety protocols. Her experience had provided unique insights into high-altitude rescue operations and emergency survival procedures. One young ranger, barely out of training, approached her nervously. "Ma'am, I'm starting my first assignment at Denali next month. Do you have any advice for someone just beginning this career?" Sarah smiled at the earnest young woman, remembering her own early fears and excitement. "Trust your training, but always be ready for the unexpected," Sarah replied. "The mountains don't care how well prepared you think you are. Respect them, learn from them, and never stop improving your skills. And remember that every person you help rescue has a family who loves them just like yours loves you." The physical demands of her new role as a safety instructor were manageable, but Sarah missed the adrenaline and challenge of active rescue work. Her doctors had cleared her for limited field duty, but the psychological impact of the accident made her supervisors cautious about placing her in high-risk situations. Sarah understood their concerns, but she felt an obligation to return to active service. Her survival story had inspired countless people, but she wanted to prove that surviving tragedy didn't mean retreating from life's challenges. She began pushing for assignment to a field position that would allow her to continue rescue work. Her first major test came 6 months after leaving the hospital. An experienced hiker had become lost in the same mountain range where Sarah's accident had occurred. The irony was not lost on anyone involved in the rescue operation, but Sarah volunteered immediately for the search team. The night before the mission, Sarah lay awake thinking about returning to the mountains that had nearly claimed her life. She experienced anxiety and fear that were completely natural given her traumatic experience. Dr. Park had warned her that confronting the scene of her accident might trigger unexpected emotional responses. But, when the helicopter lifted off the next morning, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since her fall: complete professional confidence. Her training and instincts took over as she scanned the terrain below, looking for signs of the missing hiker. The mountains were still dangerous, but they were also her workplace and her calling. The search took 8 hours, covering rugged terrain and challenging weather conditions. Sarah's expertise proved invaluable in analyzing probable routes and identifying areas where someone might take shelter. Her understanding of how people behave when lost in wilderness situations helped narrow the search area effectively. They found the hiker exhausted and mildly hypothermic but uninjured in a small cave where he had waited out a snowstorm. The rescue operation was textbook perfect, requiring technical rope work and helicopter coordination but no emergency medical procedures. Sarah felt enormous satisfaction at participating in a successful rescue that brought someone home safely. The media attention following her return to active duty was intense but generally positive. Sarah's story had evolved from simply surviving a fatal accident to demonstrating how people could rebuild their lives after trauma. She became a symbol of resilience and determination for people facing their own challenges. Speaking engagements continued to pour in from diverse organizations. Hospitals wanted her to address trauma survivors, schools requested presentations about overcoming adversity, and corporations sought her insights on leadership under extreme pressure. Sarah was selective about accepting invitations, focusing on audiences where her message could have the most meaningful impact. One speaking engagement particularly moved her. She addressed a group of military veterans dealing with combat-related injuries and trauma. Many had lost limbs, suffered brain injuries, or were struggling with post-traumatic stress. Sarah's story resonated with their experiences of surviving situations that should have been fatal. "Surviving is just the beginning," she told the veterans. "The real challenge is figuring out how to use your survival to make life better for other people. You've already proven you're tougher than most people can imagine. Now you have to decide what you're going to do with that strength." After her presentation, a young Marine who had lost both legs in Afghanistan approached her. "I've been feeling sorry for myself for months," he admitted. "Hearing your story makes me realize that I'm wasting the second chance I've been given. Thank you for reminding me that survival means responsibility." Sarah began developing a formal program for trauma survivors that combined practical survival training with psychological support. Her unique combination of technical expertise and personal experience created opportunities to help people in ways that traditional therapy might not reach. The program attracted attention from medical professionals and survival experts nationwide. Sarah worked with Dr. Park and other specialists to create a curriculum that addressed both the physical and emotional aspects of recovering from life-threatening experiences. 1 year after her accident, Sarah returned to the canyon where she had fallen. The helicopter wreckage had been removed, but she could still identify the trees that had broken her fall and the snowbank where her rescuers had found her. Standing in that place again was emotionally overwhelming but also strangely empowering. She knelt in the snow where she had built her survival shelter and placed a small memorial plaque for Mark Thompson. The inscription read, "In memory of Mark Thompson, who died trying to save others. His courage and skill made the impossible rescue possible." Sarah spent several hours alone in the canyon, processing her emotions and reflecting on the year of recovery and growth. The accident had changed her life completely, but not entirely in negative ways. She had discovered strengths she never knew existed and found purposes she had never considered before. The technical investigation into her survival was finally completed, and the results were published in multiple scientific journals. Researchers had used computer modeling and crash test data to understand exactly how the combination of factors had allowed her to survive forces that should have been instantly fatal. Dr. Patterson's final report concluded that Sarah's survival required a unique convergence of factors that might never occur again. The angle of her fall, the specific tree species and branch arrangements, the depth and consistency of the snow, and even her physical condition at the time of impact had all contributed to the impossible outcome. "This case represents the absolute extreme of human survival capability," Dr. Patterson wrote. "It demonstrates that under extraordinary circumstances, the human body can endure forces far beyond normal limitations. However, attempting to replicate these conditions would be invariably fatal." Sarah's story was featured in a documentary film that won several awards for its sensitive portrayal of trauma and recovery. The film followed her journey from the accident through her first year of rehabilitation and return to work. It emphasized the role of community support and professional medical care in enabling her recovery. The documentary's success led to a book deal, allowing Sarah to tell her story in greater detail and reach an even wider audience. She donated a significant portion of the proceeds to search and rescue organizations and trauma recovery programs, ensuring that her experience would benefit others facing similar challenges. 2 years after the accident, Sarah was promoted to Regional Training Coordinator for Search and Rescue Operations. Her new position allowed her to influence safety protocols and training standards across multiple national parks. She used her platform to advocate for improved equipment, better communication systems, and enhanced survival training for all rescue personnel. Her personal life had also stabilized and grown stronger. The accident had initially strained her relationships as she struggled with depression, anger, and survivor guilt. But working through those challenges with professional support had ultimately deepened her connections with family and friends. Sarah began a relationship with David Chen, Lisa Chen's brother, whom she met during a reunion with her rescuers. Their relationship developed slowly and carefully, built on mutual respect and understanding of how trauma can affect people. David, a physical therapist, understood her limitations and supported her continued recovery. The anniversary of the accident became an annual day of reflection and service for Sarah. She spent each October 15th visiting trauma patients in hospitals, volunteering with search and rescue organizations, or speaking to groups about survival and resilience. The date served as a reminder of how quickly life can change and how important it is to make the most of every opportunity. Her work with trauma survivors expanded into a national network of support groups and training programs. Sarah collaborated with medical professionals, military organizations, and first responder agencies to develop comprehensive approaches to helping people recover from life-threatening experiences. 5 years after her accident, Sarah stood before the International Association of Search and Rescue Organizations, receiving their highest honor for contributions to rescue safety and training. Her acceptance speech focused not on her survival but on the collective efforts of everyone who had saved her life and supported her recovery. "I am here tonight not because I was strong enough to survive alone, but because dozens of people refused to let me die," she told the audience. Mark Thompson flew into danger to save strangers. Dr. Morrison and Lisa Chen spent a freezing night searching for someone they had never met. Medical teams worked around the clock to repair what seemed irreparable. My survival story is really their story. Sarah's legacy extended far beyond her personal survival. The safety protocols developed from analyzing her accident had been implemented in rescue operations worldwide. Her training programs had prepared thousands of rescue professionals for emergency situations. Her speaking engagements had inspired countless people to overcome their own challenges. But, perhaps most importantly, Sarah had demonstrated that surviving trauma could become a source of strength rather than limitation. Her life after the accident was not just about recovering what she had lost, but about discovering capabilities and purposes she had never imagined. The small scar above her left eyebrow served as a daily reminder of how close she had come to death. But, instead of focusing on what the accident had taken from her, Sarah chose to celebrate what it had revealed: the extraordinary capacity of human beings to survive, adapt, and thrive even after facing the impossible. On quiet evenings at home, Sarah sometimes stood on her back porch looking up at the mountains in the distance. They no longer represented danger and trauma but, rather, the constant reminder that life is precious, unpredictable, and full of possibilities for those brave enough to embrace them. Her 8,000-foot fall had lasted only minutes, but it had launched a lifetime of service, growth, and inspiration. Sarah Martinez had not just survived the impossible, she had transformed it into something beautiful and meaningful for everyone whose life she touched. The woman who had once fallen from the sky had learned to help others rise above their own challenges, proving that sometimes the most devastating experiences can become the foundation for the most extraordinary contributions to human resilience and hope.